Okay, today we are going to expose one of the greatest deceptions in history. A lie so massive, so deeply woven into the foundations of theology, history, and global politics that it has shaped how billions of people view the Bible and the world itself. That lie is the relocation of the biblical Promised Land. The truth is this: the original Promised Land was located in Africa, deep in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was stolen, rebranded, and transplanted into the Middle East. But before I unfold the mountain of evidence, let me give you a warning. When investigating this, you cannot trust traditional scholars, Western archaeology, or theological institutions. Why? Because these are the very systems that committed the theft in the first place. It would be like asking a thief to testify against himself. The only method that works is this: deductive analysis of the internal geography of the biblical text itself, using the earliest versions available, stripped of manipulative mistranslations. One of the earliest Bible versions that is very useful in this investigation is the Young's literal translation. This is because it lives up to its name and sticks to the literal words of the original Hebrew manuscripts. And when you stick to the literal words of the original Hebrew manuscripts, you will see what I am about to show you: that the biblical Promised Land, from Abraham to Moses, from David to Jesus, was in Africa, not in the so-called Levant. Criteria for truth. I have built this case on 3 unshakable biblical criteria: not archaeology, not modern maps, just the scriptures and the Apocrypha. The fauna described in the Bible, the animals that lived in the land, the geographic direction from Egypt given in Genesis 13:1, the position relative to Arabia in 2 Esdras 15:29. Let us begin. Criterion 1. The animals of the Bible. The Bible speaks of lions, crocodiles, hippos, and other wild beasts. These animals are native to Africa, not the Levant. The Levant does not naturally house hippos or Nile crocodiles. Africa does. The land where these creatures thrived is where the biblical events happened. Already, the story is pointing to Africa. Criterion 2. The direction from Egypt. Genesis 13:1 in the Young's literal translation says Abram went out of Egypt towards the south. Now listen carefully. The Levant is northeast of Egypt, not south. But south of Egypt is Sudan, Ethiopia, and the heart of sub-Saharan Africa. So where was Abram traveling? The Bible itself tells you south, not northeast, and certainly not to the Negev, which is a specific place name, and not a cardinal direction. Criterion 3. Arabia and the dragons of Arabia. 2 Esdras 15:28-29 speaks of the dragons of Arabia attacking from the east. For them to attack Israel, Israel must be directly west of Arabia. Where is west of Arabia? It is Africa or northeast Africa, Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, not Palestine. The Bible's own geography contradicts the Western traditional Bible narrative. Evidence from Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees says, Ham's lands extends west of the Gihon River or Nile River and south towards Sennar. Sennar is a real African city in Sudan. Western scholars tried to confuse you by swapping Sennar with Shinar in Mesopotamia. That is how original location of the Promised Land in Africa was stolen, overwritten, and relocated. African names in Edom. Look at Edom. The Bible lists the sons of Esau, the Horites, and their clans. Their names survive today in Sudanese and Nubian peoples. Teman becomes the Temain people. Bozrah becomes Basara. Shobal becomes Soba. Kenaz becomes Kenzi. Amalek becomes Amala. These are not Levantine names. These are African clans still existing in Sudan. If Edom is Sudan, then Israel was south of Egypt too. Isaiah and Zephaniah confirm it. Isaiah 49:12-13 in the Wild says, Behold, they come from the north and the west, and these from the land of Aswan. Aswan is in southern Egypt. Zephaniah 3:10 says, In the end time, God's people, the 10 tribes of Israel, who fled the invasion by the nation of Ashur, or as the traditional scholars like to put it, those who were scattered during the Assyrian invasion, will return from beyond the rivers of Cush. Cush is Ethiopia and Sudan, so the Bible itself is screaming sub-Saharan Africa. Now let's tackle the rivers of Eden. In Genesis 2 describes 4 rivers flowing from Eden: Pishon, Gihon, Hiddekel, and Perath. The Gihon winds through Cushtree. That is the Nile, or one of its tributaries, even according to Josephus. Take note, The river Gihon is said to encompass the land of Cush, while the Pishon River is said to flow through the land of Havilah. This only fits the land of Cush in Africa, because it is only in the African Cush that we find a long river winding through the land. Also, it is only the African Cush who has a son called Havilah, through whose land the Pishon River flows. So the land of Cush the Bible is talking about here is the African Cush, and cannot be anywhere else. Now let's talk about the third river, called Perath River. This is the river that Western traditional scholars have fraudulently equated with the Euphrates River in Iraq, but it is not the same as the Euphrates River. Just think about this. The book of Jasher 55, verses 31 to 33, says Joseph hid treasures by the Perath River near Egypt. That means the Perath River was not the Mesopotamian Euphrates, but an African river near Egypt. So Eden and the Promised Land are in Africa, and together they form the Gihon River Eden-Kush River corridor in the Sudan in Africa. Next, let's talk about Babylon in Africa. There used to be a nation called Babalim in Africa. This Babalim was sometimes written on ancient maps as Babylon. Ancient maps by Munster and Ortelius show Babylon in Africa near the Nile Delta, equated with Cairo. Western traditional scholars ignored all that and just assumed that any mention of Babylon or Babalim is referring to the Babylon in Iraq or Mesopotamia. Jasher 14 describes a man traveling directly from Shinar to Egypt without crossing deserts or foreign empires, because Shinar was in Africa. Babylon was also African. If Babylon was African, then so were Daniel, the exile, the captivity, and the Tower of Babel. Now, the next one is big. Canaan itself was in Africa. Jasher 2:13 says, when the king of Cush and the army went away for war, the ordinary people of Cush built walls to resist the kings of Canaan, as they feared an invasion by the kings of Canaan. This means that Canaan and Cush were neighbors in Africa, and Genesis 13 verse 1 confirms it. Abram left Egypt and went south, to Canaan, not northeast, not to the Levant, but to sub-Saharan Africa. Next, we have archaeological evidence of the Shasu and Edom in Nubia. Inscriptions at the Soleb Temple in Nubia, Sudan, speak of the Shasu of Yahweh and the Shasu of Seir, all located in Nubia, Sudan. Egyptian papyri call Nubia, Sudan as Aduma or Edom. These inscriptions are in Sudan, not Palestine. So Edom or Aduma was the same as Nubian Sudan. This means that Israel's neighbors were all African nations, including Nubian Aduma Edom, which is the same as modern-day Sudan. The Greek theft. Joel 3 says the children of Judah were sold to the sons of Javan, the Greeks. This is the moment the land and the scrolls were stolen. The logic is simple. Any nation or group of people who were the very first people to translate the Bible from the original African languages into their language are likely the nation or people who first invaded Africa. The Greeks invaded Africa, captured the scrolls, rewrote the geography, and relocated the Promised Land into the Levant to cover up their theft. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 15:18, according to the Young's Literal Translation, YLT, says the Israelites who are descended from Shem were allocated land stretched from the river of Egypt to the Ferret. The Ferret is not the same as the river Euphrates, as translated in modern Bibles. The Ferret River was a river in Egypt, and we know this because the book of Jasher says Joseph hid treasures by the river Ferret when he was second in command in Egypt, with the aim that the Israelites will take the treasures with them to build the temple when they leave Egypt. The other aspect to all this is that if God gave any part of Egypt to Shem's descendants as inheritance, then it means Egypt originally belonged to Shem and not Ham, as we have wrongly been made to believe. This also means that parts of Africa belong to Shem, and that means some Shemites are Africans. Deductively, if Western translators originally swapped Shem with Ham, then it means Ham's actually land must then be Europe or the Cold Lands. That is probably why you see many European place names, like Hamburg and Birmingham, echoing Ham's name. The Bible makes sense only when read in its African context and tradition. So Western translators, who manipulated the Bible and relocated the Promised Land to the Middle East, have caused a great disservice and have made it very difficult for readers to understand many aspects of the Bible story. Why did they do this? They did it for power, to control theology, to disconnect Africans from their divine inheritance. If Africa is the land of Eden, of Canaan, of Zion, then Africa is God's chosen continent. But colonial powers could not enslave or colonize a people who believed they were royal and chosen. So they rewrote the maps, mistranslated the texts, and invented a Levantine Israel. It was deliberate. It was blasphemy. The consequences. If the promised land is in Africa, then everything changes. The Exodus happened along the Nile. Canaanite wars were African wars. Babylon was African. Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus all lived in Africa. Prophecies of restoration point to Africans today, scattered beyond the rivers of Cush. Psalm 68:31 declares, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." This is not poetic, this is prophecy, and it is being fulfilled. Conclusion. The Promised Land, the Garden of Eden, Jerusalem, Zion, all were in Africa. The chosen people of God never left the African continent when they left Egypt. Rather, they went south into Sudan, Ethiopia, and later into sub-Saharan Africa. The relocation of the Promised Land to the Middle East is one of the greatest frauds in history. But the truth is rising. Africa is not a cursed land. Africa is the Holy Land, the place where God walked with man. The home of his covenant people, the land of promise, and let the world hear it clearly. Africa was, is, and always will be the true Promised Land.